Hi everyone, and thank you for being with me. Good to be with you as well. And today though, I'm going to talk about Indigenous relationships and why it is that we have an Indigenous population in Australia which is so disadvantaged. And this came about because I was having a drink with my mates after golf today, and often we have interesting conversations, and one of these conversations actually focused around why is it that it started off, I think, by why is it that why do we do the acknowledgement of country? And a couple of the guys felt a little bit irritated by that, and it moved to why do Indigenous people get things that other people don't get? And I said, well, what information do you have to support any of that? And I went away and did my due diligence and started to think a little bit more about what they'd said, whether I could take that on board, agree with them, disagree with them, whether I had a solid perspective around all of that. And I guess the bottom line was I came to the conclusion that I'm not black or Indigenous or come from another country apart from Australia. That I don't have any real understanding as to why, what it's like to have the experience of losing your culture, intergenerational trauma, where there's a lot of domestic violence, drug and alcohol use, mental well-being issues, young people suiciding, and so on. So I don't live in that sort of cultural vacuum, if you like. I don't understand that. I haven't been there. And the conclusion is this: unless we have been there, unless we know what it's like specifically for these people, we really should not judge. We just shouldn't. We should make sure that we listen and hear what they have to say about their experiences. Try and understand what those experiences have meant for them, and then do what we can, if we have the power to do so, to rectify or discuss maybe ways by which improvements can be made. And then it's like, I don't understand why there's so much pushback now against citing the recognition to country, and I don't understand why there's so much hostility towards, in some areas, towards the no vote or the yes vote or whatever it is, to the voice, to Parliament. Because unless you're Indigenous, you don't know. And it just seems to me that we're so ready to judge a group of people without any real information about what their experiences have been. And it's a form of racism to judge others based on long-held perceptions or misunderstandings. Because when I went through, started doing my research today, it was evident that there's, apart from AB study, which is income for those students, Indigenous students who want to go on to further education, there's no additional benefits for Indigenous people. They have pensions, disability pensions, just like everybody else. In fact, all of the benefits are the same as everybody else, except it became apparent that in terms of the fact that they're 3 or 4% of the population, they are large users of a lot of those services, primarily because of their sense of disadvantage. And one of the things that concerned me the most, I guess, is there is something that we don't understand, which is really interesting, because we're in a way fighting against it, and that is their cultural disadvantage. The fact that they have lost their culture, lose their language, removed from their land, and in some cases, in a lot of cases, apparently removed from their families in terms of the child protection system. So there's a lot of that happens for Indigenous people that you and I, or generally others, would not understand. Yet, we're so adamant about either blaming them or saying that they get a whole host of services which is their advantage because they have all these wonderful services available to them. And I think the key problem to that is that the range of services they've had to them are often devised by governments, white people, and because of that, and because of the failure of us, white people, in order to be able to meet and understand the needs of the Indigenous people, those systems fail. Hence the reason, I believe, why we need the voice to Parliament, so that they can have the say and insert their views about every policy that's placed or every piece of legislation that is placed before Parliament. Now, when I was going through this research, I did come across some stuff that I wouldn't mind showing you. And it says here, this report measures the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It provides comprehensive data and so forth. In many areas, outcomes have improved for Aboriginal. This stuff is worth celebrating. Mortality rates for children improved between 1998 and 2018. Mortality rates more than halved, which is a fabulous outcome. Education improvements also increased. I think the use and access to AB study increased actually out of that period as a result of that. 20 to 24-year-olds completing year 12 or above had improved portion of 20 to 64-year-olds with or working towards post-school qualifications had also increased. 2014 2018, more people in the general community felt it was important to know about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, cultures, and more people rated their level of knowledge of both as high, except for some people who don't seem to care and don't want to do anything about it. But in some areas, outcomes have not improved for Aboriginal and Torres Strait people. There's the rates of children, which is one of my bugbearers, in out-of-home care have almost tripled in the past 15 years. This report is up to 2019. The proportion of adults reporting high levels of psychological distress increased from 27% to 31%. The rate of deaths from suicide and self-harm increased by 40%. I did read a statistic that did say that in the Northern Territory, over 50% of all suicides are by Indigenous people. Scary. Indigenous young people. The adult imprisonment rate increased 72% between 2000 and 2019, whilst the detention rate has decreased to still 22 times the rate of Indigenous youth. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people have a high prevalence of the personal risk factors associated with poor outcomes and are more likely to have multiple risk factors. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are often disproportionately affected by structural barriers due to their particular circumstances or the disadvantage they experience. Now, there's stacks of reports. If you want to read them, there are stacks of reports around Indigenous people and disadvantage. But when you think about it, if you come from a middle-class family, as I did, and all the opportunities that lay before me, which were without barriers, the opportunities were there, didn't often take them up, made some silly choices along the way. However, the opportunities were always there. Compared to somebody that doesn't have those opportunities, and that doesn't matter, that's not determined by the colour of your skin. It's determined on where you live, who your parents are, the income that comes into that household, whether there's domestic violence, drug and alcohol use, and mental wellbeing issues. So if you come from any environment that has those things in it, the disadvantage rate is much higher than if you come from a reasonably well-functioning, don't think there's a perfect well-functioning family, but a reasonable well-functioning family, then clearly you've got a better chance of success. So if we think about Indigenous people as coming from the position of disadvantage, of those factors exist within their family and within their community, then the chances of them becoming successful and earning the income that they need, have good health outcomes, to keep their families together so they don't have them going into out-of-home care, to not find themselves incarcerated. The possibility of that becomes greater the lesser the disadvantage. And then when you've got on top of that as well, cultural issues, losing your culture, still, that sense of being colonised by other people. And it's really hard. In part of my discussion today with these guys while I was having coffee, it was hard for them to understand that still exists for a lot of Indigenous people, that sense that they've been taken over by us white people, and that we've bastardised and eradicated their culture, which we have done. And so it's a justifiable feeling or emotion that they might have, that they've been betrayed or they've had something stolen from them. And then, of course, we have the stolen generation, literally, on top of all of that. So I think it's important for us to understand, let's not be critical, number one, until we understand what's happening for a person who often is discussed, spoken about, referred to in a negative way. Because we don't know their experiences. We don't. And that applies to anybody across the board, regardless of colour or ethnic background or whatever. And I guess number two is do research. If you're not sure of the answer, I said to somebody today, where did you get that information from? And I bombarded the poor bastard with a whole host of questions. And he said, well, you asked me lots of questions. I said, well, you're not giving me any answers. If people are holding views which you think aren't sound, then ask them where they get the information from. But when you do that, make sure that you're pretty much convinced about the answers that you would prefer to offer. So, if you're putting forward a position, make sure that you've at least done your research to find out about that. Now, I've known this stuff for years. I've been working in the area as a social worker for nearly 35 years. So I understand this because I've come across it over and over again. But I had to go through and have a look at the information itself and where that came from. And the Australian Institute of Family Studies is a great resource, I discovered, for a lot of this information, and they'll lead you to other areas where there's been other reports. So do the research. Don't allow people, and I do this now, I don't allow people to say things that I believe are unfounded. And if you're going to talk about something, make sure you've got the information. If you're going to argue with somebody, suggest they go and get the information. If they come back with a solid argument based on information, data that they have gathered, then fine. It opens it up for a really interesting and logical and sensible discussion. But not to do that is failing absolutely everybody, and doesn't help that person come to a realisation that perhaps they were wrong and that they could change effectively. We may be able to change their position. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.